Join us at Queens Public Library as we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We will be offering programs for all ages in tribute to Dr. King and recommendations for books and films that celebrate his extraordinary life and legacy. Learn more on our website at queenslibrary.org. This January, we're celebrating space exploration. Join us during the week of January 26th for space-themed science and art programs for kids, fascinating NASA presentations, and much more. Visit queenslibrary.org to get all the details about Space Week at QPL. It's time for a healthy start to your new year. Regardless of your age or fitness level, developing and maintaining healthy habits begins with mind, body, and community. Join us for a great variety of health and wellness classes for kids, teens, adults, and older adults at our locations across Queens. For more information, visit queenslibrary.org.
I stay in bed till 11:45, and then I put my clothes on.
I thought you hadn't taken them off.
Oh, I guess I didn't. I just lied. And I go downstairs to buy cigarettes, and I break a $10 bill because the cigarettes are 56 cents.
God, they are.
And I say, is Allen Ginsberg there? And he says, who's calling? And I say, it's Peter Hujar. I'm supposed to photograph you for the Times. So I get my camera stuff together. I had a flash that there was something sort of bohemian poet about it, and I'd be much snazzier in my red ski jacket.
Oh, good choice, yes.
I just think it's more like Lower East Side. I photographed Ginsberg, and he sits down in the lotus position, looking very Buddha, right in the doorway, and he starts to chant. And I really think, well, I can't interrupt God.
But I realized that to do good portraits, you have to have the time to really look at it, really see what I'm doing. Sometimes I just stand and stare at it, and it's even rather pleasurable.
I often have a feeling that in my day, nothing much happens, that I've wasted it.
Well, now you know.
I've wasted another day.
That's why I'm doing this, actually. To find out how people fill up their days.
That's what happened. That's the way it happened.
Good evening and welcome to Culture Connection, now in its 13th year at the Queens Public Library. I'm Michael Schulman, a staff writer at The New Yorker. Culture Connection, curated by Dan Zaleski and assisted by Liz Keoghan, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. We're so lucky tonight to have two incredible guests. I'm going to briefly introduce them. Iris Sachs is a filmmaker whose features include Keep the Lights On, Love is Strange, Little Men, Frankie, and Passages. He is a 2013 Guggenheim Fellow and the founding director of Queer Art, a nonprofit that provides support for LGBTQ+ artists in film performance, literature, and visual arts. His newest film, Peter Hujar's Day, which we just saw the trailer for, stars Ben Whishaw and Rebecca Hall, and revisits an interview that the photographer Peter Hujar gave in 1974 to the writer Linda Rosencrantz, detailing everything he had done the day before. It premiered at Sundance last year and is nominated for 5 Independent Spirit Awards, including Best Feature and Best Director. And Penny Arcade is a legendary performer, and playwright who has been at the forefront of the avant-garde in New York and around the world since the late 60s, when she debuted at 18 in John Vaccaro's seminal queer political theater, Playhouse of the Ridiculous. She is the author of 18 full-length works and is known for her comedic wit, forthright delivery, and stage presence. In 1970, Peter Hujar photographed Penny for Rags, a counterculture fashion magazine, and they remained friends until his death in 1987. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us. And for anyone watching, you can write in your own questions in the comments anytime, and we'll look for them at the end and answer. So I feel like there should be a third introduction of the unseen character here, which is Peter Hujar. And Ira, maybe you can tell us, for people who aren't that familiar with him, what are some important things just to know about Peter?
Peter, well, there's so much to say. I will say that I first discovered Peter's work in the early 90s. A wonderful portrait photographer, but the portrait might be a bench, or it might be an animal, or it might be a human. But he really looks in usually a format, black and white, at the subject of his work with a certain kind of emotional and psychological clarity and intimacy that when I first saw the work in the early 90s, I felt invited into a world, as well as a relationship between Peter and the subject that has carried my interest for 30 years now. Peter was part of a very vivid scene, including Penny and a lot of other people, but did do a lot of photography in the downtown performance scene and the gay community and cruising and the streets and the city. He published a book in his life, a monograph called Portraits of Life and Death. And sadly, Peter passed away in 1987 of AIDS in his early 50s. He lived, it's kind of interesting for those who are New Yorkers, he lived at the end of his life in an apartment over the Village East Cinema on the corner of 12th Street and 2nd Avenue, which is where the day he describes took place. That building is still there. You can before it was Peter's, it was Jackie Curtis's. After it was Peter's, it was David Wojnarowicz. It's you can see the windows where many of Peter's portraits were shot every time you walk by 12th Street and 2nd Avenue.
Yeah, and one really interesting thing, he's an artist who really gained his full recognition after his death, partly because of this little book, which is the basis of your film, your wonderful film. It's such a fascinating time capsule, this book. It's the writer Linda Rosencrantz in 1974 was basically interviewing people she knew about how they spent their days, and they would just pick a day, like a random day, and then tell her everything they did the day before. And this book, and then this transcript basically was, sitting in a drawer for decades. That, Linda's project didn't come to fruition. It was sort of down to the Morgan Library archives just a couple years into this book. So, Ira, can you talk about discovering this book just a couple years ago and what called out to you about it to make a film?
Yes. I was working in Paris on a film called Passages with Ben Whishaw, and we were getting along, and we were having a really fertile collaboration. And I picked up that book at a gay bookstore in Paris. And really, from the beginning, I got excited, and by the end, I had an idea. And the idea was to make some sort of project based on this text, which is solely Linda and Peter talking. And I just felt that I was, and this is why it's great to have Penny here, because she really knew him. I felt like I was drawn back into a time as if I was there, because of the texture of this documentary kind of text. It is literally verbatim a transcript of this conversation. And so it just brought me into a place. It also brought me into a very intimate friendship between Peter and Linda that was intriguing. And I found the book unexpectedly moving in the last moments, particularly. He describes standing at his window in the middle of the night, listening to sex workers on the street below him. And I just felt like I was with this man alone, but somehow I was deeply connected to him. So that was an image that I felt I had to somehow do my best to honor in the film. It was so effective to me.
Yeah, I really love how, I guess, in my mind, if I read this book and wanted to turn it into a film, I would want to show the day that he was describing, where he, photographs Allen Ginsberg and has these sort of, has talks on the phone to, Susan Sontag, and all the, lives his life as Chinese takeout, interesting stuff. And let's take a look at some of the stills from the film as I asked you this question, which is, what you did was instead kind of take the transcript and have that be essentially your script and show not the day that he's talking about, but the conversation with Linda, the interview. And as we will see, we can just run through them. You recreate Linda's apartment and they're in different rooms, and it's a movie about two people talking. So how did you come to, was that immediately what the structure was in your mind, and why?
Yeah, well, I think it was for me a very quick and certain conceptual moment where I realized that it was really how these people spoke to each other. There was so much that their conversation opened up for me, but in my imagination, I didn't need to see it. It was really through speech and language that I felt like I was seeing something. What I didn't know is really how good Ben Whishaw would be in turning this text, which sits on a page, into something even more vivid than I could imagine. I think that was one of the surprises on set, was like, oh, this is really, I'm seeing what he's describing. I'm experiencing it. And that had to do with the intimate relationship that he created somehow with himself and the 50, 60 people that Peter is describing that become this whole world. The world opens up through this very specific description of a day.
Yeah, I have to say, personally, I wanted to climb into the screen and just be in this apartment with them. It's perfectly captures just this moment in time, what New York apartments were like, what two people hanging out and talking all day. It just, there's something so kind of tactile about it, and I just love the way that you made this film so intimate and so resonant of this moment in time in sort of the counterculture, but also these two particular people. And Linda's around. I went with both of you to the Morgan a couple months ago to visit this transcript that of her and Peter, and yeah, it's just gorgeously done. So Penny, can you tell us how you met Peter Hujar?
Sure. I just want to add a couple of things,
Please,
from what you've said, and that is that while she had the idea to do this series of interviews, she actually did one, which is the one with Peter, and then she did another one with a woman. And I know this because yesterday I spent the day, I take care of the archive of Shayla Baykal, who was a very close friend and associate, also a photographer of Peter's. And I was there with Marcelo Gabriel Inez, who is a historian and who's the person who found this script at the Morgan, sent it to a friend of his to look at. That friend published it, and made a book out of it. And so we were talking, I was telling him that I was going to be doing this today. He might even be listening. I met Peter because the scene was very small. I lived in the East Village. I was a teenage walk away. I wasn't quite a runaway. And, it was a very small scene. I mean, if there were like, I don't know, 200 or 300 people in the East Village, I mean, there were many, many more people. But those of us who were on the lookout for other people, and that sort of all happened around St. Mark's and 8th Street, St. Mark's Place in front of Gem Spa. And we were always there. And, it was like an outdoor living room, and you would just hang out and you would meet people. And I met pretty much everyone I knew there. And I met Peter early on, and we always got along. The thing is, like, people talk about the secret fame of Peter Hujar, but in 1968, Peter was famous. And at that time, there wasn't this separation. You know, people talk about the avant-garde endlessly, but avant-garde is not a style like Art Deco or American Colonial. It designates a time period. And from whenever in history up until the late 60s, the avant-garde was still a part of what you would call the mainstream culture. You know, the people who were working in non-traditional forms were still connected. It wasn't like there was this separation and like uptown was uptown and downtown was downtown. It wasn't like that. You know, lots of people who lived uptown were downtown artists, like Charles Henry Ford, etc. And we also had all that history. We were connected historically back. So through someone like Charles Henry Ford, we were connected to Juna Barnes and Gertrude Stein. It wasn't some obscure thing. We knew we were part of something. And I think as queers, as people who were rejected by our families and by the culture, we were looking for that family of man and woman, which was, in our case, an artistic lineage. You know, so I was friends with Peter for a couple of years before he photographed me. He photographed me, excuse me, I've got this little frog. He photographed me because of this, you know, I was like a downtown it girl, but not like just Paris Hilton type, but, you know, because I was a theater artist and I was doing crazy performances with the Playhouse of the Ridiculous. And they decided, Lisa Robinson and Henry Edwards decided that I was ripe to have a feature done on me. And because Peter was my friend and was also friendly with Lisa, they decided that Peter would be the photographer. And so I felt very comfortable about it. I had been being photographed incessantly by Lee Black Childers, who was the photographer of the day at Max's Kansas City, etc. And we were all good friends, and we just photographed day and night, you know, everything we did, long before, you know, Nan Golden would go on to do a similar thing of like just photographing her friends. I went to Peter's loft, and he had this big white, you know, white roll of paper. I'd been photographed, but I'd never been photographed in a studio setting. And I was really, really relaxed until we started doing the photos, and he started saying, "When are you going to drop it? When are you going to drop it?" And I was completely confused because I was just like, "Drop it? I just pulled this together." You know, like, what do you mean drop it? And the one of the photographs is not there in the series that you have, but you see this photograph where I have dropped it, and I look like a Maori. I look so essential. He photographed me at my most essential. And Peter always said that nobody wanted to be photographed by him because he showed every flaw, every pore, etc. But I believe, as we hear in the film, where he wanted to be with the person. You know, he was on a journey of a kind, and I think it had a lot to do with his isolation and his alienation.
Well, let's take a look at what you're talking about. We have some images from this shoot. So this is Rags, and this is one of his photographs. And then it comes with the article. So this is your interview. And then let's look at some of the individual photos and talk about them. So, okay. So Penny, what are we looking at?
Well, this is I hate this photo personally. It's 1/10,000th of a second, but I'm wearing this dress that's completely sheer. And I went out in this dress with no underwear at Max's, at gallery openings. I just had my crew with me, Jackie Candy, Holly, Rita Red, Lee Black Childers, who have, this kind of crowd that I was with all the time. And so that's the story of that dress, which is quite amusing. There's another photo that's not included here. I lived at that time with Danny Goldberg, who went on to be very famous in the music business. At that time, he was a PR guy. He wrote for Record World. He was it was that beginning of all the rock and roll writers, and he was one of them, except that he had a paying job working in a mainstream industry rag. And there's a photo of me and him on this same bed. And so let's go to the next one. So there I am in one of my many 1930s slips and nightwear. But see, I love it. Like you see, it's very very unposed. Like we don't clean up the background.
Is this your house or is this?
This is the same apartment.
This is your apartment.
This is my apartment at 13 St. Mark's Place.
I see.
Where I lived with Danny, and the building is famous for Lenny Bruce lived there. With Gloria Stavers, the famous magazine person who started 16 magazine. Continue. So this one, these with the white background, these are all at his studio.
So different. Those two photos are so different. They're the same. Are those? What are the? How old are you in these? What these?
I'm
two?
19.
All of these are 19.
Well, I'm 19 in all of these photos. But it's interesting because once again it's 1/10,000th of a second.
And were these only used for press, or did Peter use these all? Did he consider these his own work, or did he look at this as a job?
I mean, I think that he did look at it as his work. Do you see this necklace I'm wearing? This was made by Robert Mapplethorpe.
Oh wow!
At one point, before Robert started doing photography, he made jewelry, and these are little skulls and beads. He made me this beautiful necklace. When I came back to New York in 1981, I'd been gone. I went on a long walkabout, and I skipped the 70s in New York and traveled around the world. And then I came back, and because of my age, I was 30, and because I was extremely youthful, I was allowed to come back in, which New York is not forgiving in that way. If you leave, you leave. But they retired my number. And I came back and was able to step back into the same scene I had been in.
But it must have changed a lot between 70 and 80, I would assume.
Well, yeah, what had changed was some people had made money and had success, and Peter Hujar was considered a has-been, and Robert Mapplethorpe was considered a famous artist.
Right.
And this was a really big difference because, up until not that long ago, you were only considered a real photographer if you printed your own work. And Robert symbolized that moment when all that started to change. And so I came back into a landscape of people who were amazing people, but who felt they'd had the rug pulled out from underneath them. And that was Jackie Curtis, Jack Smith. It went on. And they were, with the exception of Jackie Curtis, who was 3 years older than me, most of them were 15, 18, 20 or years more older than I. And that is one of the reasons why I stayed loyal to the downtown art scene. I don't think it did me any good, but that was the reason why I did stay loyal.
What was the reason? I'm sorry, I'm not. The reason
I stayed loyal to these because of these people who were very important to me, and I could see that there had been this change. I mean, there was a gentrification. You know, I've said this before, you may not have heard it. There's a gentrification that happens to neighborhoods and cities, but there's also a gentrification that happens to ideas. And the idea of downtown, the idea of alternative, had been gentrified by people who didn't wash up on the shores of downtown New York, like me or Peter Hujar or whoever else, you know, which includes Patti Smith and even Robert Mapplethorpe, et cetera, you know. But these people who had read about downtown New York in the Village Voice, they read about it in the Soho News. They moved to the East Village because the Talking Heads moved to the East Village. It was a gentrification of the idea around, let us say, Bohemia.
Right.
Know?
An aspirational quality, you're saying.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
I mean, if you look at what was going on at Club 57, you know, these were people who were lonely for Andy Warhol. They believed that if only they had been in New York when Andy, you know, was doing his movies, they could have been part of it. But they weren't doing anything really radical. They were, let's recreate Beach Blanket Bingo. You know,
the 80s were also Reagan era. So in a way, a lot of the things that allowed someone like Warhol to be famous as a really out there queer creator get more difficult around 1980, right? Like,
yeah, but it's also because of who moved downtown. It's because of I mean, no one I knew would have ever thought of Peter Hujar as a has-been. You know, I mean, Peter had you know, there was an article in the Times a couple of years ago, and it was about Peter Hujar. I think it was about the show at the Morgan. And I had to write a letter in because the woman who wrote it, very well-meaning, but like most people, doesn't do primary research, called Peter and Robert peers. And I had to write her and say, no, Peter was a famous photographer 15 years before Robert ever picked up a camera, and Peter was, and Robert was very influenced by Peter. And also I want to say that when you talk about Peter becoming famous after his death, he became famous only in a certain milieu that had not been aware of him. And part of the reason that he had become famous was because Robert Mapplethorpe had bought a lot of his photographs. And in that period right before and after Peter died, Robert was obsessed with him. When Lynn Davis and whoever else it was, the grown-ups, as I would call them, did a installation in that loft on 2nd Avenue that you speak of after Peter died. And, you know, it wasn't, I mean, we could say it was open to the public, but it wasn't like it wasn't like a thing, but Robert was there. And Robert was minutely inspecting the printing on every single photo. And, there's all this secret history, and there will be, as long as there's not something in it for somebody to aggrandize themselves with. When at some point in the future, were there to be a future, people would really do deep research, you know?
Well, Ira, I wanted to ask you, one thing that's so wonderful about this book, which then became wonderful about your movie, is like it captures like this community, this web of people that existed in this, that,
Mhm.
sort of frozen in amber in 1974 when he's describing these phone calls he's making, the people he's seeing. Was that a very familiar milieu to you? And like, did you discover new people, new things as you're sort of trying to make sense of like what he's talking about, how, what were the relationships among all the friends and rivals and whoever that are described in this day that he's describing?
I knew the top level, like whatever you call it, like the top shelf famous ones, but there were a lot of people that I've discovered. I mean, I ended up making a glossary for Ben Whishaw and also for myself. And so I think there's 47 names mentioned, and I did the research and got down to like 43 that I know something about. I wouldn't say I'm I'm not, I don't know everything. I'm not a scholar, but I knew enough to share something with Ben, including like if I found a photographer like what's her name? Raymond. Leela Raymond. I would find that who I didn't know, but then I would find photographs and share them with Ben. So I would try to give Ben, or various painters that are mentioned. I would try to, or Tuli Kupferberg, who was part of the Fugs, and I would try to, and I would actually get Vince Aletti, who's mentioned, to check my pronunciation of everybody. So I would go in and I'd say, Vince, is this how you say this? And he'd go, no, you got that wrong. So I was trying to get things right without being academic. And also there's certain things in the movie, in the beginning of the movie, the first thing you see is a clapper. And one of the reasons it's like a film clapper, it's my crew going like this, start of the show. And one of the reasons I did that, perhaps defensively, but also with a sense of humor, was to say, yeah, I know it's a movie. Like, this is not fact. This is being recreated. The two actors, Ben Whishaw and Rebecca Hall, are both British people. Rebecca's playing a Bronx Jewish girl, and Ben is playing a Ukrainian immigrant, New York East Villager. They're faking, their accents are constructed. So I was really interested in putting right up front that this was a construction. But it means something to me that Penny, for example, responded to the film, because I'm not sure everyone who knew the world and knew the people would do so.
I think everyone that I know who's seen it, who knew Peter, had exactly the same reaction as I did. It was a little bit uncomfortable at first because it's not Peter, doesn't sound like Peter, doesn't look like Peter, but almost immediately, and I would say literally within 5 minutes, I was there experiencing it as Peter. And I think that the real reason because of that is because of the power of the word.
Yes.
You didn't change. There are people who have made films like the one who made the Happy Birthday, Marsha P. Johnson, where they take Marsha P. Johnson and put her in her own apartment in the East Village, an Art Deco pink apartment, and she's writing invitations to her birthday party, which she's going to have at the Stonewall, where she's going to perform that night, and then there's the riot.
Right.
And I saw that at the Brooklyn Museum, and I started screaming because Marsha was homeless. There were no performances at the Stonewall in those days, and this was like, why are you doing this? Why are you erasing history? Now, Ira, you did not do that. You presented the text as it was, and the power of the word, which we poets are always talking about, proved
I think
itself.
that's true, but I think it's also connected to the performances. And I'm just saying that because
of course.
They owned the language in a way that means, like, even if we did change the words, which we did not, you wouldn't know, because there is a kind of fluidity and ownership that I think was really, as I said, it was the surprise for me that these two actors were able to embody on that.
Well, I mean, I feel and felt, that there was a great amount of I'm an actress, so as an actor, I thought there was an incredible amount of integrity to the performances, including, with Rebecca Hall, who had very few lines, and yet, kept the film right at that level.
Yes.
But I have to say though that the ideas and the thoughts in the text are so engaging.
Mm.
That we're all eavesdroppers, aren't we? I mean, there would be no art if there were no eavesdroppers. So that has a lot to do with it as well. That but I was very impressed with you that you just took so much care, with the material.
I have to say, when you mentioned the Gem Spa and the streets, I thought of a story I knew about Arthur Russell, who was a musician who lived down the street from Peter on 12th Street, also in the Poet's House, where Ginsberg itself also lived in the same building. And Arthur met his partner, Tom Lee, on that corner right there, like at a phone booth, right where you're describing where people would meet. And it's just interesting to me that it really was I started to think why it's called Greenwich Village. Like it was a village then, which it's not anymore.
Right. And also the East Village was the cheap end, the cheap end of it. As a matter of fact, the year I moved there, 1967, when I washed up on the shores, I can't actually say I moved there, but I ended up there, was the year that they started calling it the East Village, because they were trying to make it attractive to NYU students with the cheaper rents compared to what we call the West Village now, but which was actually Greenwich Village. This was really the Lower East Side.
Right.
Penny, it occurs to me that, you were part of this scene that has been so mythologized over the years and so revisited. And it's great to hear that you saw this movie and found that it didn't distort what that was. But I can only imagine how much you walk around screaming all the time at, things, what people get wrong when they dramatize that the downtown of that era that you lived through. Are there sort of, besides like the kind of small fact checking things, like this person, Marsha P. Johnson was homeless, no, there weren't, performances at the Stonewall. Are there kind of like, what else do people get wrong when they revisit that era?
Well, I think the real problem is, it's not so much what they get wrong, is that it's people's inability to look at a period through the lens of the period. They want to look at it through today. And I think that for those of us who love history, and this also goes back, I mean, it might be a generalization for me to say it, but, people who are queer, when we looked back in history, to read and be in those other places, to be in Natalie Barney's living room in Paris in the 1920s, or to to think about Jane Bowles and Paul Bowles in Tangier in 1958. We didn't want it to be like now. We wanted to be like then. We wanted to feel that sense of connectedness, that sense of, dare I say that word, lineage. And it was all about lineage. And I think that that's the problem, is that people hate lineage. They want to be it. And I think, you're going to find, as time goes on, things that you experience, that you lived through in New York, you'll start hearing their, people reinventing it, I mean, let's face it. When I moved into the loft I live in 1981, I found a stack of Vanity Fair magazines from the 1920s. And I sat down on the floor and I went through them, and not one person who they were writing about was famous. I didn't know the name of any person. And that will happen. That will continue to happen. People who are the most, we don't know who our most important artists are. But as Fran Lebowitz famously said, that if all those people who died of AIDS came back and you said, hey, guess who's the most famous photographer? Guess who's the most famous, stage performer? They'd be howling, because the standards were so much higher. You know, the standards have, let us say, the standards have fallen a great deal.
But just his point of contradiction,
Yeah.
I would say for me, if I kind of think that all history is lies, I don't have any idea. Like in some level, definitely the lies can be deeper and can have more density. But to imagine that we can actually be or know even what we did yesterday, which is part of maybe the film, it would be false. We can't really describe what we did yesterday accurately. We can only just describe it creatively or emotionally. So for me, I really, and I'm working on a film now set in 1989 in New York City, and I'm really not burdened by the idea of replication. It's more.
But it also depends whose 1989 was it. Do you know what I mean? There's as many different 1989s as there were, but when you talk about a specific place like Max's Kansas City, 1971, everybody who was there might have some varying ideas about it, but it would be pretty much in the same ballpark. I know that
I would say that for me, that there's the idea of trying to talk about history. You're going to fail if your criteria is accuracy. And so I want to say that's a given.
Right.
And then let's see what happens. And it's all in the present, right? It's only in the present.
Yes, but I think it's also in the texts.
I think,
you know what I mean?
Certainly.
I think it's also in the text. I know that when I was interviewed for Please Kill Me, the oral history of punk, which Legs McNeil and Gillian McCain did, I got so many people wrote me about my chapter, you know, and the reason that they wrote me was because I made it real. I made it real to them through my language.
Right.
Now
you were
I'm somebody.
Good storyteller. You were
I'm a storyteller, and also I want to really convey. I'm a witness. I'm an observer.
Right.
You know, I've been doing a performance memoir with music because I've been writing my memoir, and that became so tiring for me because I remember too much and I know everything. So it's like not as much fun as telling it to the audience. And one of the things that happened in the process of doing those performances was that I had to, recreate these moments in my own life, and people could feel it if you really have a desire to communicate. But I'm talking something. I mean, as a filmmaker, you're a poet, right? You're not building a house. You're not building, you're not making a castle of stone. You're building an experience, and that's a poetic act, right? So
I think your choices are. I mean, this is Michael, who is a writer also. Like, and you write sometimes in small and sometimes in large, and even the large you have there's limits in journalism, particularly in the magazine. It's like what words do you choose, and how well do you craft them and craft the images? And well is for me about poetry.
Yeah, but it's also about your intention. What I was trying to say about me writing my performance memoir with music is, surprise, surprise, I'm not the star of the story. And people are shocked by that I'm not the star of, I'm a witness, I'm an observer. I was 18, 19, 20, 21. I was not I was not who I am today, and I think that, if you have the intention to tell the truth of what you know about something, to do your best to serve the language, to serve the experience. And I think in journalism, that's the highest you can aspire to. And I think in a documentary style film, that is also the highest you can aspire to.
It's funny, as you say that, I'm realizing one of the reasons I loved Irish film so much is that it reminded me of what I do, which is take language. I write for a section called Talk of the Town, and I love what it sounds like when people talk and you put it on the page. And it sort of can speak for itself, and you as an observer can kind of disappear and let the talking happen. I mean, I tried to do that when I wrote about Ira and Linda visiting the Morgan, just like let people's dialogue tell the story. Anyway, I want to remind anyone who's watching, you can submit questions. And we'll roll them in our remaining minutes. We do have a comment from Stephen who says, watching the film, I appreciated that there was no attempt to impersonate. I mean, Ira, from my impression is that there was no ability to impersonate because there's not, there's not a lot of video of, or any video of
Any
talking.
Well, there was, it's also connected to a decision because I did have some audio, some quite extensive. I had an interview that David Wojnarowicz did with Peter towards the end of his life that's actually at Fales, the downtown collection at NYU Library.
Yeah.
That's quite extensive. And that is, then I have this other tape, which is wonderful, which is Peter, which is in the Morgan collection, which is Peter hypnotizing himself to learn how to stop smoking. So I hate cigarettes. It goes on, and it's very charming. But the other tape Ben listened to a lot, but from the beginning, I said, don't try to impersonate. Peter had a very distinctive voice.
Yeah.
I mean, that I know from these tapes. It was a very, very distinctive. And we were not chasing it. Rebecca also had an interesting, what Rebecca could do though was, because she had many fewer lines and because Linda is alive and well and was part of this collaboration, we had Linda read all of Rebecca's lines for her. And so that Rebecca could hear that very beautiful accent that Linda, carries with her at 92 years old.
Yeah, New York accents don't exist anymore.
That's true. I made a film called Little Men with a 12-year-old boy with an New York Italian-American accent, and he was 12.
Wow.
And I cast him immediately because I was just like, that accent on a 12-year-old is so amazing. Like
I have to watch it tonight.
Oh, he's great. His grandmother was on Mulberry Street, so that's just how it happened.
Yeah,
I love that. That's so true. I love that movie, first of all, Ira. But I grew up in Manhattan, and I was born in 1981. So that when I hear like a New York accent, it's like it's like a Madeline. It brings me back, and I hear all the cab drivers and people, waiters, whoever, people who are just surrounding us who talk like that, and they don't anymore. It really is disappearing.
I'm from Memphis, and I have to say, the accent is not as strong as it was, but if you go to Memphis, you still hear, like, there's still regional accents, there's still neighborhood accents, there's still there's actually still Brooklyn and Queens very strong accents.
Yes.
There's a woman I met in Bay Ridge who works in a diner, and I was doing a location scout, and she has a very strong Bay Ridge accent, and she said how hard it's been for her in her life because people make such assumptions so quickly about her.
Bay Ridge is one of those places. It's like a backwater almost. It really doesn't change over there.
You can buy at this diner. You can actually still get a grilled cheese sandwich for $4. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, amazing.
All right, let's look at another question. Congratulations on this fantastic program to all. Both Rebecca and Ben were so great in your film. Ira, can you mention any other actors who were considered for your film?
It was really it was Ben and I making this project, it was so deeply connected to Ben. And then I met Rebecca like a month or two before we wanted to make the film, and I had tried to work with her before on a film, and she had said no. So I was very happy to have a second opportunity with her. I think she's if you don't know her work, she's amazing. But specifically, there's a film called Christine where I was just like, wow, that's a brilliant performance.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, well, you and Ben, how many films have you worked on with Ben now?
We've made these two so far. So yeah. And we hopes. I have a very nice, I think Ben and I connect as two people who could have imagined or wanted to live in that time as queer men, gay men. I'm a gay guy. I'm queer also, but I'm definitely a gay man. And I think there's just an interest in the risk taking of that time, like thinking about creative work, still recognizing the bourgeois needs, but also that's why I go back to the East Village and Penny and your work and the work of the people that you were such a part of, is because I just feel like risk was really embraced as central to creativity.
Yeah, I think it was part of post-traumatic stress.
What do you mean by that?
I think that most of us were so stressed out by our lives about being gay. I mean, I actually have pretty much stopped using the word queer because it doesn't mean anything anymore.
Mm.
But I think that part of that risk was transferred to art, that had, like in Bitch Dyke Fag Hag Whore, I say, to be queer means that you have experienced a period of rejection, ostracization, and isolation so profound that it marks you as an outsider forever. And that, I think, was behind a lot of the work that people, so once you found yourself in New York and you were no longer, afraid of being killed or beaten up or found out, then a lot of us transferred that risk into art.
That's really great.
I want to invite you guys, Michael and Ira, to come to Soft Network, where we have all of Shayla Bakal's work, and you can see a lot of the photos that she did of Peter. She did Peter in drag. I mean, there's some
I would love to. I want you to know, I read about Shayla. We were always trying to get to know more about Shayla because she's mentioned in the film.
Right.
She had a way with men on the street, construction workers.
Right.
And so I sent your article to Ben and Rebecca, and we were all like, we were both really.
Anytime you want to, we would love to have you, because that was so wonderful for us. And to me, it was a gift from Peter that he would mention Shayla.
Oh, that's
because it's so hard. I mean, I've been promoting Shayla and her work for 29 years since she died, and it's very hard, to promote dead people,
Yeah. On that note, we have a comment from Ken, which says, "Thank you for this. It is probably worth mentioning Penny's project of downtown oral histories, stemming the tide of cultural amnesia." Penny, what can you tell us about that work that you've been doing?
Well, Steve Zettner, my longtime collaborator of 34 years, and I were approached by public television. They were Rick Youngers, who was a public television activist. They were trying to raise the level of public TV and trying to get artists involved. And so I was very aware, that's 1999. I had been aware for some time that we were just losing people. We were losing history. You lose a person, you lose a history. And so we, as a labor of love and part of our social practice, started interviewing as many people as we could. And originally to create a database of material for future scholars to look at, to try to gather this history that was disappearing. And I think that at that time in 1999, we helped change the ideas around oral history in academia, which used to be that you could only interview an important person, you could only interview Allen Ginsberg. You couldn't interview the people around Allen Ginsberg who saw everything, right? So at any rate, we've done over 100 interviews. A lot of our interviews have been used in other documentaries and other films. We broadcast every Monday on all of the streaming platforms, all the cable, Lower East Side Biography Project, and it's also on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Lower East Side Biography Project. And it means not that the people lived on the Lower East Side. It means that we're on the Lower East Side making that project.
Since this is a library, I want talk. I wanted to just mention a book that I'm reading because it connects to what you're talking about queers and alienation and loneliness in the city. And it's a book called The Lonely City. It's by Olivia Lang, and it's a memoir that also includes descriptions of Hopper, Darger, Henry Darger, David Ronerovich, and one more person I can't remember. But it's really about, in a way, these people who are drawn here and somehow and their loneliness somehow being central to the work they made. I think you might like it, Penny, and other.
Yes, I actually have it.
Oh, good. I liked it.
Yeah.
Reading it now.
I mean, one thing that about Peter was a real chronicler of the night.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all those photographs of empty streets.
Yeah. True.
You could just feel him in it, you know. So interesting.
While we're talking about while we're reading, it's funny. I'm reading a downtown memoir too. I've had Eileen Miles's Chelsea Girls on my shelf for a long time, and finally, you know, when I was thinking of what to read in 2026, I thought, you know, I got to read this. It's been sitting here.
Great.
Yeah,
I haven't read it. I will.
Isn't it funny that we buy these books? And I was just thinking about this year because I used to have such shame about all these books I had that I bought that I never read. And then I realized it was aspirational.
Yes, that's
you know,
right.
that I would read these books.
Yes.
You know, and that changed the whole thing, my whole relationship, you know, because people come to a guy moved something for me, and I'm sure he was a thug. And he you know, it was like through Craigslist or something. And he came into the place and he went, "No TV? Just books? Nothing to steal."
That's great. All right. Well, we don't have a lot of time left. So before we go, I want to mention that Peter Hujar's Day is now on streaming. You can buy it, I believe, on Apple TV and Amazon Prime. It's going to be on the Criterion Channel on some point. Is that right?
Correct.
Yay.
And Penny, what do you want to mention? Anything else that you're at work on?
Well, I'm working on my memoir. I'm working on the memoir show, which is episodic. We're supposed to be doing 4 performances in May of the second episode, which is called The Reluctant Recluse, 1974 to 1981. I'm doing an event at the Whitney with Marcel Gabriel, Inez, with
When
David
is that?
Hirsch.
When is that?
That's January 25th at the Whitney.
How much are
And
that?
it's on my Facebook. If you I keep an open page. You can go on Penny Arcade Superstar. I come by it honestly. I try to use my Facebook like a magazine to promote things. I'm going to promote the fact that people can see the film, because I think a lot of people really want to see the film who didn't get to see it when it was at Film Forum. And congratulations with the streamings. That's so exciting, really exciting.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the Independent Spirit Award nominations. And I just, the more people discover this movie, the happier they're going to be. So,
Yeah.
I want to just say thank you to you two, because I knew when they asked me to do this that because you guys were involved that I would be inspired. So just thanks for showing up and sharing. And Penny, that's amazing work you're doing with the Downtown Oral History Project.
Thank you. Any people can go if they want to onto Patreon and /Penny Arcade. For $2 a month, you can see many of the Lower East Side Biography Project and all kinds of stuff, because we also video a lot of memorials. So, you know,
Wow.
if you missed Herbert Huncke's memorial, if you missed Gregory Corso's memorial,
That's great. Well, so I want to just thank Dan Zaleski, Liz Keoghan, and Eve Ethard from
Thank
the
you.
library. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ira and Penny. This has been such a privilege to be able to have this conversation. And thanks, everyone watching, and have a great night.
Including my mother.
Bye, Mom.
Oh, hi, Mom. How great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.